All right, folks, thanks so much for coming out. I had a much colder version of this last week. I was on the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, and for many reasons, I'll take the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. I'm the executive director of Keep Our Republic. We're a C3 nonpartisan nonprofit, and this is what we do. We have community conversations. This is not, I see some students, this is not a lecture. This is a conversation. We want to make this as interactive as possible. The professor knows the Socratic method. He's going to call on folks, but I know that people have questions because you might have heard there's an election coming up. You can't really turn on the television without hearing a campaign ad. And this is what we're doing. We're doing this in Pennsylvania, in counties large and small. We're doing this in Michigan, in communities large and small, and all across the state of Wisconsin as well. We've been doing this since 2020, since the spring of 2020. And I'm really excited because I know here in Westmoreland County, there's a lot of questions about these themes. We're not the blue team, we're not the red team. The only thing we are here to talk about is election administration, okay? Everything from the precinct level process to election night, how that data, so to speak, is getting to county government, the interplay between county government and state government, and I think increasingly we've heard there's more and more involvement with the judicial system, the court system. So we are honored that tonight and before this, we had about 4 dozen members of the Westmoreland County Bar. We're honored that the Westmoreland County Bar Foundation helped bring us together along with our wonderful host here at St. Vincent's. So I'm really looking forward to listening and learning, and I'm going to hand it off to our great moderator.
Well, hello, everybody. If you don't know me, I'm Jason Jividen. I'm the chair of the Political Science Department here at St. Vincent. We're also co-direct our Center for Political and Economic Thought with Dr. Zach Davis, who I think might be here. So I was brought in to be a moderator with people who probably have a lot of moderation on their own. I don't know if they need me here to moderate them, but what I'm going to do is help lead a discussion. And as we said before, we hope that this is a discussion where you participate. You'll see in the middle of the room, there's a microphone, and we ask if you have questions to step up to that microphone because we are being recorded, and that way also the whole room can hear you. Students that are here that have been to many of our CPET lectures know the drill. You come up and have the guts to ask a question and engage in some conversation. So we're excited to do that. I want to thank a few people before we begin and say a few opening remarks and introduce our panelists, and then we'll get started. And when I get started, I'll probably throw out just a couple quick questions for the panel to comment on, and then as we move along and things become organic, we'll open it up to the floor. And so if you'll be patient with us for a few minutes as we kind of get started and get ready to go, we'll certainly open up questions to the audience. So I'd like to thank just a few folks. The Westmoreland Bar Association is here. They've been here all afternoon. We want to thank them. We certainly want to Keep Our Republic, the project, for sponsoring the event. Thanks are also due to a few people who helped set this up behind the scenes. Rarely behind the scenes is Dr. Ankoviak, but he's here somewhere. Thank him for all of his work. And also thanks to Crystal Denny, who's here. I believe thank her for putting everything together. She was a big part of this. So unless you've been living under a rock, you know that over the last several years, there's been a lot of nationwide concern, a lot of discussion, and frankly, some very fierce disagreement about our electoral system. The 2020 presidential election and its aftermath, both immediately and in years later, might come to mind. Although distrust in elections sometimes cuts across party lines, if we're being honest with ourselves. A recent 2023 Gallup poll suggests that only 47% of Americans have either complete or a lot of faith in the accuracy and integrity of our elections. Sometimes, at least, that distrust might be attributable to a lack of information. Some would say misinformation, some would say disinformation. But I think to be charitable, we might say just a lack of information. Tonight's nonpartisan panel aims to foster our better understanding of the 2024 electoral process, both at the local level, the state level, and then of course also at the national level. Now, the project sponsoring tonight's talk is called Keep Our Republic. You see some of the signs around. And I know many of you in here, because you're good students of American politics, are familiar with the story of Elizabeth Powell, a woman who approached Benjamin Franklin after the Constitutional Convention of 1787. She was inquiring about the result of the recent convention. What was the result? And she asked Dr. Franklin, "Well, doctor, what have we got, a republic or a monarchy?" Franklin immediately and now famously replied, "A republic if you can keep it." Now, founding a republic is certainly no easy task, but perhaps no less difficult is our task, that of preserving and perpetuating our regime to future generations. A key part of that effort, of course, is civic education, which is what we try to engage in here at St. Vincent College, both in the political science department and elsewhere. Among other things, we ought to inform ourselves about our electoral processes and examine the measures in place to ensure that elections are free, that elections are fair, that they're transparent, and that the electoral results are, in fact, accurate, or at least as accurate as possible. So we have 4 distinguished panelists here tonight to help us think about all of this, and I want to introduce, we have 3 actually, we had 4 scheduled, sorry I said that, we have 3. I'm going to introduce each of them, and then I'll posit a few questions for the panel, and then we'll open it up. So first, on the right, no pun intended, we joked about that coming in, we have Governor Tom Corbett, an executive of Some of us know Governor Corbett because he taught here for a little while with us, teaching state and local government. We were really happy to have him here when he was here. But right now, he's executive in residence at Duquesne University School of Law. The former governor most recently served as an adjunct professor at the law school there. As the Commonwealth's 46th governor, Corbett held Pennsylvania's highest office from 2011 through January 2015. Corbett has a long and distinguished career serving citizens as Assistant U.S. Attorney, Chair of the Pennsylvania Commission on Crime and Delinquency, the Pennsylvania Attorney General, and Governor. Corbett has also served as a key advisor to U.S. presidents and several state governors. Next, we have Judge Bob Sendrich. Judge Sendrich was appointed by President Bill Clinton and unanimously confirmed by the Senate to serve as district judge for the United States District Court for the Western District of Pennsylvania. Previously, he served in the Army Reserve, worked as both a public defender and assistant district attorney in Allegheny County from 1978 to 1991. He was U.S. Attorney for the Western District of Pennsylvania and retired from the bench to serve as Chief Legal Counsel to University of Pittsburgh Medical Center. Since spring of 2023, Rob Beecher serves as Deputy Director of Policy for the Pennsylvania Department of State. Prior to joining the department, Beecher was a litigator at Hogan Lovells in Philadelphia. Graduating cum laude from Harvard Law School, Beecher served as executive article editor for the Harvard Law and Policy Review, competed on the mock trial team, and worked as a teaching assistant in first-year civil procedure. Several of our students here on the mock trial, I'm sure they'll want to pick your brain here in just a moment. Among other achievements, he conducted externships with the Pennsylvania Department of Community and Economic Development, as well as the North Carolina Department of Justice. So again, let's just say hello to all of our panelists. We're glad they're here. So the way we want this to work, again, is to spark a conversation. But in order to get that conversation going, I'm going to first address a question to Governor Corbett, but I'm going to invite the rest of the panel to speak to this as well. So Governor, I'm going to ask you a question. You've been traveling, we know, on behalf of the state, and behalf of Keep Our Republic, all across Pennsylvania to discuss how our election process works. What are some of the questions and concerns that you've heard from voters and interested citizens? What are the things they're most concerned about with regard to Pennsylvania elections? What are the things that have stood out to you over the last few months of offering these sorts of talks? And then we'll invite other people to speak as well.
I'm going to take advantage of the position and ask you a few questions first, because I like to know my audience. How many of you are students? This is class participation time. I teach at the law school. How many of you are political science majors? Okay, history majors. How many of you are getting credit for coming to this class? Okay, now we know why you're here. Okay, and for the people that don't go to school here, thank you all for joining us. It's a good question. Hard to answer that directly because a lot of people don't ask me directly, what do you think about the election? And I'll tell you why. How many of you have one of these on you right now? Who doesn't? Okay, one or two. Okay, this has changed the dynamic of politics, and not for the good. Not for the good. Because what it has done, it has divided. I mean, I like it. My grandkids like it. You know, my students like it. It can be used very positively, and it can be misused. Not in a bad way, but misused, misunderstood. How many of you have a favorite television program you like to watch? Okay. How many of you like to watch public broadcasting? Well, okay, about 5. Okay. You get this. Same thing here. And what has happened to the electorate, you are the electorate, whether you are 18 or whether you are 100, it has divided people into saying, okay, I want to watch this type of news. I want to watch these things. As you know, Google will send you what they think you want to see. And so you start looking at what everybody says. Who's everybody? Everybody is whoever they tell you everybody says because you're looking at it. So you are red team, blue team. It's the best way I can describe it. I got both colors of black on here. Okay, figured I better not wear anything Republican tonight. Because this is our bipartisan effort to educate the public as to what happens in the Electoral College. Now, when I was a college student at Lebanon Valley College, way over in the eastern part of the state, I couldn't vote until I was 21. Vietnam War was going on. We couldn't vote. And we had a lot of opinions about the Vietnam War. Well, we have those opinions today, but your younger population, you can vote at 18. But you're relying upon what you got here. We relied upon CBS, NBC, ABC, and PBS, and the newspapers. And the newspapers themselves had their own political slants. There were Republican newspapers, there were Democrat newspapers. Same thing with the media. But you could see it all. Voluntarily, individuals have said, I want to see what I want to read. And they're not necessarily hearing what the other side may be. Well, that's the far right. That's the far left. I'm not going to ask how many Republicans and Democrats are in here. But I will ask this. How many registered independents are in this room? That few. That few. Okay? Pennsylvania is one of only 2 states. I'm looking to the Secretary of State's office. I think it's 2, maybe 7 states that independents cannot vote in a primary. And that's what I hear the most. I hear people of both parties saying, I don't necessarily like my candidate, but I can't vote. I'm a Republican or I'm a Democrat. I can't vote in the other party. Or I'm an independent, and independents have grown more than any other of the parties. I think, again, I'm going to look over to the Secretary of State's office, almost 1 million independents in Pennsylvania. But we have a closed primary system, and they can't vote in it. A lot of other states, you go in day of the primary election, say, I think I want to vote in the Democrat primary. You sign up, you vote in the Democratic primary. You can't go and vote in both. You can only vote in one. The next year, you can go and say, I want to vote in the Republican primary and do that. So we've had the independents grow in number. And as a result of that, they're not helping to choose the candidates of the parties, of the Democrat and Republican parties. And you have seen in many instances, you got the far right, you got the middle right, you got the middle, you got the far left, you got the middle left, and you got the middle, okay? It's changed the dynamics, and this has exacerbated what that is. So what I hear a lot is, well, the one thing I heard repeatedly is, why can't we get better candidates? How many of you would volunteer to run for office today? Okay. How about anybody under 20, under 30? How many of you would volunteer to run for office? I see 1 hand, 2 hands. Okay? You better start rethinking because you are the future of politics. I started as a township commissioner. I was told I was a registered Republican. They put me on the committee. Back up. I used to work for him. I was an assistant. He was the U.S. attorney. When I left the office, I became politically active because you can't be politically active in the office. I became politically active, and they said, we want you to run for township commissioner. Why do I want to run for township commissioner? I said, well, we just want to put your name on the ballot. You can't win. There's an incumbent there, 8 years, you can't win. You're out-registered 2-1. I won. Why? Because if I'm going to put my name on something, I'm going to work hard at it. And we were able to make some changes, okay? Some people agreed with us, some people didn't. That's what got me involved. I always liked politics. I grew up in a political family, not active, but my mother, my father, and my sister all had opinions. I'm the only one that ever acted on the opinions. But we were involved, and we have to be involved. And we have an electorate that's not involved. We're going to get what we deserve. So the reason I say this, Professor, is I want you to be involved. More than just, I'm going to go vote. That's great. But you got to be involved somewhat. Consider running for township commissioner. I might counsel against school district. They don't get paid anything, and they have the hardest job probably of any elected official when it comes to creating policy for the schools. But we need you to be involved. When it comes to keep our republic, what we're trying to do is educate the public as to how the system works, and we'll get into that now. That cover it. I'm not trying to, take over the whole conversation.
Fantastic opening. I'll ask the other panelists if you want to comment on that question. What are you hearing out there? Maybe we could say in the Department of State, what are you hearing about concerns from citizens or voters? What stands out to you in the last few years?
Well, first of all, I want to thank the folks here at St. Vincent's. I want to thank the great people from Keep Our Republic, and thank you, Governor and Judge, because one of the things that I hear most are questions about our system, questions about not just the candidates, but how do I vote? Questions about what happens with my vote? How do we ensure that the results are accurate after Election Day? One of the things that I hear more doing these types of activities is how many people really care about the process and want to understand and hear more about it. We still hear questions about some of the big changes that have happened in Pennsylvania's elections in the past 5 years. Questions about no excuse mail-in voting, the large investment that the Commonwealth made through Act 88 to provide more funding to our counties who are the primary entities responsible for running elections. So we hear a lot more questions about the process, and it's why I'm really grateful for opportunities like this, the great partners we have who put these on so that we can help answer those more directly.
Judge, could I ask you a question about courts?
Sure.
And please feel free to comment on the more general question as well. But, since 2020, we've seen dozens of lawsuits, both here in Pennsylvania and elsewhere, tied to the presidential election. It looks like, I hate to say, maybe 2024 will be no different. One question we wanted to ask was, how have these election controversies, nail-biter elections, and these things being litigated, how is that changing the role we think about, or how we think about the role of courts in our democracy? It seems that this used to be a matter for legislatures primarily, but courts seem increasingly involved in the electoral process. What's your impression about that? Is it a good thing, a bad thing, and where might we be headed?
Well, I think anybody would, if you think about this, knows that if democracy is truly working, we don't need much in the way of courts. We resolve our disputes. We debate. We elect, we support, and we don't go to court. And that's what I wish we'd be doing. In some senses, this overly litigious society, particularly nowadays when it comes to political matters, such as elections, as we found in the last election, is very dismaying because it's an indication of a potential failure of a democracy. A democracy which is so divided that it cannot unite for the common good for something as important as what? Electing a president of the United States. If we can't do that, folks, we're in trouble. So about the courts, I know I skirted the question because it's really true. I wish there was no need for courts. In fact, talking about that in a more abstract way, if you think about the Constitution of the United States, I mean, we revere it. It was written a long time ago, and it was in large part a good faith agreement. I'd call it a gentleman agreement, but it's really today a gentleman and a ladies agreement. Anybody with a will to subvert the Constitution through litigiousness, through misinterpreting it, through filing multiple lawsuits, can disrupt the system, create the kind of division that we're talking about, that we're trying to eliminate through these discussions. And it's up to each of us to understand that. We say Constitution, nothing can change that, can we? And the question is, what is it? And if we do have an understanding of it, will we adhere to it? Will we follow it? Or will we just do what we want to do? So I guess it's a long-winded answer to the question. Courts, by the way, are really only a partial solution. Courts can make a ruling on whatever matter in particular is in front of that court, whatever that might be, whether it's a voting issue or whatever. What it can't do is cause people to agree, respect that vote. that has to happen through dialogue and discussion. So the court's role, I guess, ultimately, the court's word is the end, but it's not really the end in a democracy where what has to happen after that is a coming together. That's it.
We also want to comment on that question, your thought about courts and their
Well,
increasing role.
frankly, they've always been involved to a certain extent, but it's a last resort. You don't want them involved. And when they are involved, it's a very close election. Very close. Bush v. Gore, 2000. Very close. Now, one of the other aspects of it is this instant information. Today, you pull out your cell phone and you go, where's the answer? Come on. You expect to get the answer right away. When computers first started, you had to plug it in, the modem, bang, 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 all those noises. I see the older people going, oh, yeah. The younger people go, you grew up on this. When I worked for him, we didn't have cell phones. We didn't have computers. Okay? It's not that long a period of time. But we have become a nation, we want instant result. And what happens is the media starts projecting who the winner is of this state or that state early on before the polls even close. Oh, we're not going to project it, but they do. They're telling you right now who's leading in the polls. Well, there's only one poll that matters, and that's the one on election day. But it's that need for instant information that has driven a lot of the problem here that are ending up in front of the courts. And then, oh, by the way, the media, and when I say media, I mean everybody in the media, it doesn't matter which side, they're looking at the background of the judges. This is my boss. I'm a Republican. He hired me as a Democrat. He's a Democrat judge. He never thought as a Democrat judge or Democrat U.S. attorney. I never thought as a Republican U.S. attorney. And most of the judges are that way. I can't say all are, but in this day and age, it's very easy for anybody to go out and say, I think that Bob Sindry's blah, 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 blah. And it gets repeated and repeated and repeated, and all of a sudden it's fact. But there's no basis in fact in that. And that's why I go back to this. But the judges, universally, I believe, are trying to do their job as they see fit, as they see is the right way. Now, they each bring their own opinion, so we can change. And I can take certain circumstances, whether the political or criminal case, take them in front of 5 different judges and get 5 different opinions. That's part of our society.
I think from the department's perspective, one of the most crucial things is to respect the rulings. As the judge said, courts are a place for some disputes to be resolved. We have seen the courts resolve certain issues related to elections in the past few years, and from the department's perspective, it is our job to be a resource on what the law is for counties as interpreted by our courts. The Shapiro administration will defend voters' rights in courts. We recently defended and won a decision that ballots included in mail ballot envelopes that are undated or wrongly dated should be counted, but we have lost that case in prior decisions. And regardless of what the decision is, we respect that ruling by the judiciary. We include accurate information in our guidance, and we seek to be a resource for the counties to fairly administer the election laws here in Pennsylvania.
Yeah, I was actually going to ask about that, some of these recent changes, these recent rulings, and I was going to ask you sort of what's the current status, especially with the idea of dating. I know it's the issue of dating mail-in ballots, often ballots that were instructed to have a certain date in a certain form. The question was, is that any way related to the vote itself? I was wondering if you could elaborate a little bit on some of these federal rulings, because I don't know that everyone's familiar with them.
Sure.
You know, can I just interrupt? Can we set a stage a little bit? Things happened in 2020 that had never happened before. One particular thing, do you know what it was? COVID. And COVID brought about the issue of mail-in ballots in Pennsylvania and around the country. Before that, it was an absentee ballot. And you had to go and apply for an absentee ballot if you knew you were going to be out of the jurisdiction and send it in. And we created mail-in ballots without really having the guidelines that we probably should have had because it was an emergency. We had to react. And whenever you do something a little bit different from the way it's been done all the time, everybody goes, wait a second, what's going on? Who's watching this? And everybody believes in conspiracies. And they start mounting and they go back to this and it goes, well, did you see they were dumping into this box or that box? A lot of people ask me as Republican, how can you say that? I said, listen, I'm a prosecutor first. What do I need? To prosecute a case, what do I need? Evidence. Give me the evidence. To this date, nobody's ever said, here's the evidence. Show me the video. Show me the numbers. Now, do I believe Philadelphia might kind of fudge a little bit? Yeah. You know. Do I believe that some other places may have in the long run fudged? Yeah. I went to law school in Texas. They were well known for back in the 1800s bringing people across the border to come in and vote in the border counties. Okay? That's in the fabric of what has been politics. But in this day and age, with these and with information, it's much more difficult to continue to do that. And everybody expects a perfect election. I will tell you today, there is no such thing as a perfect election. We do the best we possibly can. Sorry to interrupt you, but it sets the stage for you.
This is Ted Kopis, Westmoreland County Commissioner. He couldn't join us early. He's going to join us now. And here in just a second, we're going to open some questions to the floor, and he's going to help us out by answering some questions.
My apologies to all of you. I swear I was not trying to make a dramatic entrance by any means. So my sincere apologies. Hi, Joanne.
You've got fans in the audience already, I think. Rob.
Of course. So the question was about the most recent ruling, which was by the Commonwealth Court related to undated and incorrectly dated envelopes that contain mail ballot and absentee ballots. As the governor said, Act 77 was passed in 2019 before COVID was on the horizon, bipartisan legislature and signed by a Democratic governor, but it was implemented in the midst of a pandemic. There were a lot more questions raised about some of the rules related to that. And one of the things that we at the department have known for a long time from talking with our county partners is that the dating requirement on a mail ballot envelope doesn't serve a purpose for election administration. When your mail ballot envelope reaches you, it has a special barcode that is directly tied to that voter. Your county election official knows when they scan that mail ballot return envelope in, the day that it was sent out, and they mark the day that it was received. So that information of what you date on your mail ballot envelope doesn't really tell your election administrator anything related to election administration. And the Commonwealth Court on Friday agreed with petitioners that that means that it violates the Pennsylvania constitutional right to vote. Appeals remain pending, but that is the most current ruling and state of the law regarding undated and incorrectly dated ballots, is that failure to date your ballot or using an incorrect date on that mail ballot envelope should not solely be the reason that your vote isn't counted. That is a position that the Department of State and the Shapiro administration agreed with, and it's a position that we will enforce until and unless a court tells us otherwise.
And that ballot is still secret.
Yes, and again, this is nothing about the secrecy envelope requirement. It still protects the secrecy and the legitimacy of your envelope. Yes, of course. Is that easier? I wasn't sure which microphones were audible
I
where.
think it's the one that's in front of you is the hottest one with the red light. You can use the handheld if you'd like, but I think
Great.
the one right in front of you should be active.
Of course, happy to use whatever is helpful for folks. It's also on this one?
Just for the, yeah. Okay.
Is that better? Is that better?
Speak very loudly.
I'm happy to speak more loudly. All I will say is to reiterate what I said, the department and the Shapiro administration is pleased with the Commonwealth Court ruling from this past Friday, that no ballot should be discounted merely because of a failure to complete a task that has nothing to do with election administration. But as the panelists have all said, we have enormous respect for the judiciary, and we will enforce the law as interpreted by our colleagues, our dedicated, nonpartisan colleagues in the courts.
Ted, I know you just got here, but could I ask you a question? The reason I asked you a question, I think it flows very nicely with what we've been talking about. Here in Westmoreland County, we were talking a lot about elections. We've talked on sort of a state level or even a national level, but just here in Westmoreland County, especially for students in the room, if you could just say a few words about how the election process works, just practically, and especially what checks are in place to ensure that the election is fair and secure. The real animus for this conversation is the fear out there that our elections are somehow inaccurate or we can't trust them. What are we doing at the local level?
Well, thank you for that question. Can everyone hear me? Okay. Let me answer this in two parts. Let me pick up on the mail-in side first, since that's where we kind of left off. Obviously, the county is responsible for conducting the actual physical election, and that includes receipt of the mail-in ballots. I think it's very important to understand first that every mail-in ballot that comes in is secured, first and foremost. It is verified that it is from a registered voter, and it is locked away with one person who has the key, by the way. So these are secure from the moment they are received until they begun to be opened the morning of Election Day. I think that's very important. Now, going further, once those ballots are begun to be opened or in pre-canvassing on Election Day, we have it set up in sets of teams. Okay, I want to say 4 teams there is. If I got this process right, it should amount to 4. The first team literally verifies that the address is a verified voter, and that in the SURE system, which is a statewide uniform registry of electors, that person did indeed request and receive an absentee ballot. That's the first check. Make sense to everybody? Everyone still following? Following through that process, they open the envelope, pass it to the next team. The next team removes the ballot on the inside after, again, verifying the registration, and begins that process of opening that ballot. Still following me? Okay? These are 2 separate teams, so we already got 2 separate checks going on. Okay? Envision us here. It gets passed down another line where the second team verifies the secrecy ballot is inside there. Okay? Passes it on. The third team opens it, verifies that the ballot matches the registered voter that it was assigned to, and then it is put to another team who inserts it through the scanner to record the vote. Make sense? So in other words, it follows a controlled process of touching a number of hands, so no one person or no one team we can allege them any impropriety. So that's a very important check and balance in there. Now, to the machines themselves, this is where it gets a little bit dangerous, if I can use that term. Unfortunately, some have allowed fantasy or misinformation to become a reality. It is not. The errors that people allege on Election Day are entirely human error. I'll say it again. It is entirely human error when someone incorrectly or inadvertently drags their finger onto a button they didn't mean to hit. Okay? That obviously is easily corrected. If you see something light up that isn't what you wanted, you can change it. So there's an immediate step in there that allows you to correct it. After you go through your ballot and hit confirm, it actually prints out the paper ballot that everyone loves to talk about nowadays that allows you to verify once again that every one of your choices is what you intended. I think that's very important. There's a big misconception about the beauty and the holiness of paper ballots these days. Paper ballots are a requirement in every county in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. You can verify that for me. So there is indeed a paper ballot. It is a big misnomer that we don't use paper ballots. So you have another check there to verify your ballot. And if it isn't what you wanted, that ballot can be spoiled and you can start over. Okay? And then when you have that sacred paper ballot, you put it into a scanner that verifies your vote has been recorded. And it also provides a verifiable paper trail for any audit that would come of that election. Okay? The third part I would mention on the machines themselves, they are open to public inspection prior to an election when we do our logic and accuracy testing on them. It's an open process. We've had people that have come into this process thinking they're going to find some improprieties or some malfunction, who go through the process, they're walked through, and they see everything is done right. I still don't want to believe it, that it works right. These are the dangers that none of us on this panel, regardless of what title we may hold, can solve. To the young folks in this room, our only battle in misinformation is truth. And I'm hopeful, again, my apologies, that what this fine panel was laid out to you tonight thus far has been truth. And I hope that answers your question to a certain extent.
Thank you. Well, I think what I'd like to do is to begin to open this up to you, the audience, to ask questions. There's a lot of people here. I'm sure we have a lot of great questions, and students are even here. And they always have great questions, right, students? So what we ask here at St. Vincent and here in the Rogers Center is that you step up to the microphone. That mic should be live. We'll check it when we get started. But if you want to form a queue, any questions you might have for the panel, I think they'd love to answer. And probably what we'll do, you can certainly ask questions of individuals, but we also encourage questions that perhaps everyone on the panel could speak to. So if someone would to get us started, the line can form. Dr. Selleff, you want to stand up and go first? I think you had the cue. All right, good.
Thank you for coming. Thank you, gentlemen. Governor Reporter, thank you for your service. My question is, hopefully not long-winded. I want to thank you for being here tonight. My question is, I've read all the information about pre-canvassing and all that stuff you were talking about. It seems the last election day, seems to be an archaic term coming up. Pennsylvania is still going to do their several days for counting in the national election. Florida takes the lead, Texas takes the lead on having their ballots and votes counted with a bigger block. And just wondering why Pennsylvania is not taking that lead also. And it's been 4 years since COVID. So thank you very much.
I'm going to look to the Secretary of State's office first.
And I'm happy to answer that question. One thing that Texas and Florida have that we do not in Pennsylvania is a larger period of time for pre-canvassing. So you mentioned that you have that understanding of that piece, and as Commissioner Kopis explained, that is a very secure and intensive process of pre-canvassing, of going through, inspecting each element, opening the elements, unfolding it, checking the qualifications. In Pennsylvania, you are not even permitted to start that process until 7 a.m. on Election Day. That is not the case in Florida and Texas. The Secretary and the Shapiro administration would support a change to that law. It's been one of the most common requests from county election administrators to change the law and allow a greater period of time for pre-canvassing. The law has not been changed. We will continue to enforce the law as written. Our county election officials have developed a lot of expertise in the time since 2020, but we do appreciate the public's patience as we take time to accurately and completely count the vote.
And on a practical level, first off, I'll add, at the county level, we are compelled to do what state law tells us to do. We have zero flexibility in that regard. However, I certainly would be supportive of earlier pre-canvassing starting only because of the load on manpower. The folks, the teams we have to put together that are working around the clock to do this, it is intensive. And given everything else going on, it is highly scrutinized too. This is a pressure-packed time, and everyone wants results instantly. So any relief the legislature would give counties to start pre-canvassing earlier would be very welcome for counties, and I think would better serve the public as well.
Who's first?
That's okay. I'm the purveyor of the books on the dais. My daughter worked for Congressman Jody Heiss, and she was in charge of the book launch. So I present them to you, gratis. And I've got a couple more if anyone's interested in a book by the name of Sacred Trusted by Congressman Jody Heiss. Heiss, and I have a couple more copies if you have to give.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Several things. One is that I've discovered there are two ways to vote early in Pennsylvania.
Please talk to the microphone.
It's the first time I. Oh, okay. I'm like a rock star now. Anyways.
As long as you don't sing, but we're okay.
That's correct. So there are two ways that I've found that you can vote early in Pennsylvania. Please add more if there are more. One is what used to be called an absentee ballot, where you request an early ballot. The other is that when they receive the paper ballots, I can go to the courthouse, vote, it will go into a locked box and be counted starting at 7 a.m. So you can do it in person or you can mail it in. Any other ways to vote early?
So those are a couple of different things. There are in Pennsylvania both absentee ballots and mail-in ballots. And both of them are subject to the same procedure where you could have the ballot sent to your home, or you could go to your county election office or a designated satellite location and conduct the same procedures there. They'll run the same certification and verification check that Commissioner Kopis was talking about, making sure that it's a complete, accurate application tied to a real voter registration record. And there are some additional procedures for overseas voters, and there are some caveats, but
for all of us in this room, those are the two I know of. The other is in the 2020 election, I was somewhat disappointed that the court decisions were not passed back to the legislature, as it is the legislature's responsibility to regulate the election. Except for someone saying, well, it was an emergency, coronavirus, et cetera, why was it not sent back to the legislature as electoral law, to my knowledge, is the responsibility of the legislature?
Yeah, I hope I can answer that. We have both in the state government and in the federal. Is this on? Is everybody here? No? Let's see. Well, I'll try a little louder maybe. In effect, it's separation of powers. The courts resolve issues that are presented to them, whether they be under the Constitution, a question about what the Constitution means, or whether it be a statute. The courts decide that. But we have legislative, executive, and judicial parts of government. And the courts have no power to tell the legislature what laws to make, what regulations, or any administrative body from the executive branch, what regulations they can make. The courts, that's not the court's business. That is the business of the legislature. So even though we might wish that they would act in a way that was consistent with the opinion we just wrote, if they don't, there's not a thing we can do about it.
Dr. Selp, I'll allow you one follow-up, and then we've got people in the queue.
I was just going to say, unfortunately, I saw the court acting as the legislature with their decision instead of putting it back to the legislature, which again has the ultimate goal, has the ultimate responsibility for determining election law.
I agree. Maybe I misunderstood the question, but yes, the courts, it's inappropriate for a court to be telling a legislature what laws it should enact or how to enact them or what the content of those laws should be. You make the ruling and the legislature can read the ruling. Sometimes they say, fine, we read what you wrote, but we don't agree with it, so we're not going to do anything. And that would be their prerogative. And then the voter, that's up to the voter now to say, why aren't you doing something? But not the courts.
We have a few people in the queue, but ma'am, I know you asked if you could ask a question from there, so the spotlight's on you now if you want to ask a question.
I was just.
Go to the microphone. Well, it's for the benefit of the people in the back.
About my hearing aid. Oh, sorry. I was just going to ask about the voting at the, well, there's so many regulations. Maybe where is the first place to get our local, on the county website, to look at how students are treated? Are students' votes accepted here, or are they accepted in Florida? I don't know, there's so much. My husband said he hopes he could come here and have 3 sentences to say to people, this is why I believe our elections are safe. But in essence, though, maybe my one question I will ask is, election workers, how many are paid employees, how many are volunteers, and what is the selection? For instance, I've said, I like the ID and show me your ID. When I walk in, I've been there 25 years, nobody says, they say hi to me. You know, I mean, they don't ask me, but are they checking signatures? And then it brings up the question, what will the kids do if they don't write cursive?
That's a whole different seminar.
There's a whole lot to chew on there, so.
We'll save that
Good
there.
question.
I guess just to answer a couple things that you pointed there. The folks in the polling place are indeed paid workers. In most cases, they are elected judges of elections. And if those positions aren't filled through an election, they are appointed by the Elections Bureau. That answers
And there's
that.
one from each party. There's a minority and a majority. Correct?
I'm sorry, for machine inspectors, there's one from each party. The judge of elections is
Right.
a singular.
How is the party handled then? Are there equal number of people selected based upon their party, or is that or not a issue to balance the number of Democrats and registered Republicans who are working at the poll?
So, as the commissioner said, in the first instance, folks are elected to serve as poll workers, and there are a number of specific elected positions, including the judge, the majority inspector, the minority inspector. There are also machine operators, and just to give you an idea of the scope, Pennsylvania has about over 9,000 voting districts at about 4 to 5 precinct workers that you need for each of them. It's about 45,000 people working the polls on election day. It is a fantastic way to get to know the system. It is a fantastic way to see firsthand the checks and balances in the system. Because those folks that have been working the polls, the ones that know you when you show up, they're the same ones that are enforcing the rules there every election day with every single worker there. It is a transparent process. It's a secure process made up of community members. If you want accurate information on what rules are available in the polling place, I would encourage you to check the Department of State website. We have guidance. We have web pages that answer questions like, when can I be asked for ID? Your first time voting in that election district, or if you had been inactive and you're registered in the poll books as an inactive voter. But the best place for accurate source of that information is on our website. One of the best ways to learn and see about the checks in the process are to work in these very important positions. Because they are paid, they are also vital and important and made up of people generally who are not there for the check, but there because they love the system, care about our elections, and care about having them administered fairly.
And there's one other level of sort of volunteer insurance where the parties appoint poll watchers just to kind of be another set of independent eyes on the whole process. So there's a number of folks you probably noticed when you're voting. There's a lot of people there, and all of them have a very important role to play.
Some are allowed inside, some are on the outside. I think each candidate is allowed to have one person on the inside. So if there's 10 persons on the ballot for all the different offices, it could get really crowded in there. What never happens in my polling location. There's a couple people. They're on the outside, and they're there handing you this and this. I've already made up my mind who I'm voting for, okay? So everybody's nodding along. But they are your neighbors that are in there. Go back to what I said about conspiracies before. Show me the evidence. Show me the proof. Not conspiracies in there.
Mr. Boyer.
Gentlemen, I'd like to thank each of you for being here. Governor, almost a year from today will have been when you and every other former governor of Pennsylvania, back to Governor Ridge, had a letter open talking about the opening of the primaries here in the Commonwealth. You had already mentioned a little bit about how we have 1.2 million independent voters that cannot vote in the primaries. Now, being a younger person and knowing how elections have gone the past few cycles, we're seeing more and more people are just staying home, not wanting to vote. They don't think that matters, and it starts at the primaries. So I'd like to ask you, but the entire panel as well, if once we do have a repeal of the open primaries happening in the Commonwealth, will that change for the people of Pennsylvania? Will we have a greater voter turnout? And could that ultimately change on how the Commonwealth votes, both for gubernatorial elections, presidential, and all others within the counties?
I got two short answers for you. Number one is in fun. If I had that answer, I'd be voting on the lotto right now. Okay? Because who knows? Do I hope it changes? Absolutely. Because I think what we've seen is a dynamic of the parties as I grew up in them, as gentlemen here at the table grew up in, and my dad grew up in. They've changed. They've evolved. Again, I'll go back to this. Everybody gets different. They all have a different perspective, but they were all limited to one. Do I see us going to like Germany or England where they have 4 or 5 different parties and they have to get a coalition of groups? No, not in my lifetime. But I do see if they open it up, in my opinion, you will see the candidates, the extremes, have to start playing more to the middle than they have to today. Okay?
Yeah, there's a lot of things that could be improved, I think, and one of them would be open primaries for that reason. Right now, the candidate in a district that is ultra-liberal has to be an ultra-liberal to get elected and vice versa. And that's not necessarily the best candidate. That's where you can get more votes that way. Ranked voting is a potential solution where people could vote in order of their preferences. And in that way, you can eliminate the lowest ranked voters and have the runoffs. Now, it takes a little more work and money, and frankly, be a burden on the counties because they're the ones that bear the burden of election expenses. But I think those kinds of things would be helpful so that candidates cannot win simply by pandering to the far right or the far left and find middle ground somewhere where most of us live. But we'll see if it ever happens.
I'll give you a prime example where they demonstrated it. That's last year's district attorney's election in Allegheny County. Yeah. Okay, because what happened there is Steve Zappala was going to lose his election in the primary, even though he'd been there for a long time, to the farther left. I supported him in getting him on the Republican ballot so that he had people from both the Republicans and Democrats were able to vote for him in the general election, and he won that election. That shows when you have different perspectives, things can change, okay?
Yeah, it was very, very interesting going to the political rallies and, you know, a bunch of Democrats in there, and it's a Republican rally because Steve was running now as a Republican. But I found it refreshing. It was refreshing to meet a lot, well, first of all, a lot of my old friends that I hadn't seen in years, but also new Republicans that I hadn't met because I haven't been around much recently. So it was actually a very interesting thing, and thanks to Tom, we got that opportunity to have that experience in Allegheny County. It was a good experience. And I voted Republican.
I hope he did for me, too.
I did.
It's a question for the legislature. From our perspective, open primaries would require a change in law. It's our responsibility to administer the law. So any questions about changing the primary structure in that way would be a legislative one.
I guess I'll add 2 additional thoughts to that because, I mean, these gentlemen at the other side of the table made some compelling arguments. I would remind any voter in this room you can change your registration up to rather shortly before an election. So if for whatever reason a candidate on the opposing party is more appealing to you, it's very easy online to change your registration. You can do that as many times as you want. There's no rule against it. I would counter to the larger than an open primary relating to, you know, seats that are locked one way or another. I think that speaks more to the way our districts are designed and gerrymandered in that process. Rather than changing our primary system, my focus, if I was king for a day, would be on how our districts are drawn. I think that would satisfy the goal that he was alluding to there.
Thank you.
Yeah, that brings up a funny story. In a moment of insanity many years ago, when was that time? It was in the 90s. I agreed to serve as the chairman of the Pennsylvania Legislative Reapportionment Commission, whose duty under the Pennsylvania Constitution it is to establish the districts and also the Senate boundaries. And I'm happy to say that you have the minority leader of each party and the majority leader of each party, and me, the chairman, who's to be an independent. And I'm proud to say that I did not go to jail. The other 4 did. It's true. I didn't make it up.
I just wanted to firstly thank you guys for coming.
You got to speak up a little bit.
Sorry, is this better?
Yep, that's better.
I just wanted to firstly thank you guys for coming and for the panel. I had a question about you always hear the phrase election night, at least you have the last 2 elections and probably this one, the red barrage that everyone calls it. I have worked in pools up in Henderson Township and Jefferson County, very tiny, like 1,000, maybe 2,000 person voting district. We're done counting votes by like an hour or 2 after the pools. How do you address the claims that people are making about these elections are taking longer to count when you have larger districts like Westmoreland, for instance, which I'm sure take way longer to count? So I just was curious, like, how do you balance the narrative that comes out that they're cheating overnight by bringing in votes later on in the larger counties?
I think it's important to get accurate information out there. Counties do it differently. Some counties actually calculate their mail ballots. They're able to get through their canvass and pre-canvass throughout Election Day and are able to start reporting results before in-person polling totals are done. But the most important thing is to make sure that everyone knows that results remain unofficial until the certification. It's important that people have accurate information and that they're patient and respect the process as it plays out. And I think that's something that all of us here are dedicated to, is to making sure that there's good information out there about that vote counting.
This election, I can assure you that the first tens of thousands of votes will be mail-ins coming in. In Westmoreland, we've really streamlined that process, getting faster scanners and the like. That information will probably be dumped by 9:30, start being populated. That'll be the first batch. And as you explain to folks the truth and the facts as he was alluding to, you got to remember Westmoreland County, for example, is the size of Rhode Island. I mean, to get from Monessen to Greensburg takes a while. From New Florence to Greensburg gets a while. Especially for you younger folks in the room, we do live in a culture where we want everything now. We want it immediate. We're going to look at our phone and get the answer. Some old-fashioned patience does really matter here. And the worst thing that we or any county or any election official could do is try to rush through this.
Thank you.
Could I ask a follow-up question to that? Actually, it's something. So the state sets the standards, but the counties are largely overseeing the elections. And so maybe for especially the benefit of students, maybe to say that why it's set up that way, but does that create any special challenges or tensions that need to be dealt with on election night and after?
It's a structure that's set up by law and by the Constitution, certainly as long as I've been a Pennsylvania voter. It means that it's really important that there are great leaders and educators out there to try to explain to people what might be some of the differences about procedures in one county versus another. Because there's a lot that is left to county discretion to decide to do or to not do. The Department of State and this administration has made things more uniform in some ways to assist in voter education. For example, the Shapiro administration directed that counties have more uniform mail ballot envelopes. And this allows for better education because it means that a voter in Westmoreland County can call their dad in Juniata County and their son in Allegheny County and know that they're looking at fairly similar envelopes. There are opportunities to do that to try to get the benefits of statewide voter education, but there are also benefits to the county-based system, including the closed, secured system that we have with our decentralized voter registration systems and those records that are maintained by the county. It's a part of being a Commonwealth, is that our counties have a lot of discretion and responsibility in how they run elections.
So here's a question. Who pays for it?
It's a shared responsibility, basically.
Each county has their own participation and their own budget. It's not a universal budget coming from the state, correct?
Correct.
Should it be? I'm subject to debate.
I would sign up
trying
for
to
that
get anything-
tomorrow because elections are quite expensive, as you might imagine.
Yeah, trying to get anything through the state legislature on that was nigh on impossible. But every county does it a little bit differently, and they've got to pay for it. So those outside envelopes are paid for by the state, by the county, not by the state. And every county does it a little bit differently. So if you think about it, it's a national election that's sent down to the states, that send it down to the counties, that eventually send it down to the precincts to run a national election. Maybe we're crazy.
That's kind of the Commonwealth in general. The 67 counties in so many ways are like the administrative arm of state government, elections being the most prominent example.
Well, historically, that probably started because in America, early America, after the Constitution was passed and you had your first elections, you probably couldn't do it any other way but at the most local area because people had to get there by horseback. We just never changed it. But if you think back to then, what it would take, you couldn't have a vote statewide in Harrisburg. You couldn't get there from Pittsburgh. So it's one of those things that it has historical roots, but obviously, as the governor just said, we should take a look at that. We being the legislature.
And the department always supports more financial investment in our county election officials. A few years ago, the legislature did pass Act 88, which is about $45 million in grant funding that is divided among the counties proportionate to their populations to assist in certain voter registration activities. That's all very transparent. The amount that they spend on Act 88 activities is reported to the Department of Community and Economic Development. It is a great investment because it is a shared responsibility, and it is primarily borne by the counties.
I'd like you to address drop boxes and what's the state guideline for the mail-in drop boxes and what you feel the security is on that. Is it for every county to decide if they're going to have a drop box for the mail-in ballots? We know the issue with the mail. Sometimes the mail takes forever to get there. And if somebody's just got their mail-in ballot and they have mobility issues and they can't get to the election bureau to drop that off, what is the status of that in the state, if you can help? Especially on the security, because we hear some people think it's not security.
Sure. The current state of the law is that counties have discretion to designate additional places where folks can return ballots. They might designate unmanned receptacles called drop boxes. They might establish staffed sites like Allegheny County did. They might establish staffed drop boxes. Those are all matters within county discretion. The department under the Superior Administration put out new guidance on recommended best practices for securing and monitoring those sites, including recommended chain of custody procedures to properly track and record those mail ballots, but it is still primarily a matter of county discretion.
Do you know how many counties do provide drop boxes? I can't.
The department makes that
I know Westmoreland County does not, so that's why I'm asking.
It's hard to say whether they do or don't because it may change election to election. The county boards of election may offer them for some elections, but not all. I can tell you that when that information is collected for each election, it is publicly made available on our website, and we encourage counties to post it to their own. So I can't tell you in any given state this early what it will be like, but we will provide information on our website as it becomes available.
Thank you.
Hello, thank you guys for being here today. So my question was, we start seeing primaries come about more in February, and Pennsylvania is later in the spring. This might not help for 2024, but for 2028, especially in the Republican primary this year, we started off in February with a multitude of candidates, and by the time I got to Pennsylvania, there were only a few left on the ballot. How would the state address this, that Pennsylvania, a swing state in past recent elections, can have more say in who this nominated person is in those elections?
So I'll answer it real quick. It's totally a legislative process. And there is a resistance at this point in time for them to move that forward. It already moves from non-presidential years. It's May is our primary. In presidential years, it's April. Now, you may say, well, why so late? You have to circulate petitions. Petitions are so many days out from the primary. The earlier you bring it, the more you're putting it into January and February, going door to door, circulating petitions. So there's somewhat of a reluctance from that standpoint. Shouldn't be, but there's somewhat of reluctance. And, you know, people like, well, we've always done it this way. That prevails in the General Assembly. Well, we've always done it this way. I don't disagree with you. It would help if we had it sooner. But I don't see a willingness in the House or the Senate, and anybody here want to debate that, to change that at this point in time. Unless the populace brings it up and says, we need to change it. And how do you do that? You do it at the ballot box with who you elect.
Thank you, guys.
I also would like to thank you for showing up here and giving this information that's so valuable. I also would like to point out that the microphones are not only directional, but there's a distance factor involved. So that for those of us with presbyocusis who are more than 20 feet from you, it's a little different and a little more difficult to understand what you're saying. I'd like to point out that some ballots arrive ill and need to be cured. Would somebody please explain what the curing process is for ballots that arrive in the mail and seem to have a little bit of illness, and how we do that in Westmoreland County?
Define illness.
Well, perhaps there's something missing, an appendage, or a stamp, or a number from an address. What do we do with that? Do we disenfranchise that voter?
Well, since you asked specifically about Westmoreland County, currently there is not a curing process. A curing process is essentially defined as our election bureau receives that ballot and it has a deficiency on it, meaning a signature or date are the two obvious ones. Counties have discretion whether or not to set up a curing process. Westmoreland County has never had one. Despite my objections, I think it's the right thing to do. But I think, Ralph, that issue may have solved itself if the Commonwealth Court decision holds.
I'd also like to point out that although having served a couple of terms as my majority inspector for the election, I cannot point out enough how important those people are who work there.
Yeah.
To characterize that as a paid position is a generous characterization.
Yes, it is.
It's probably 80% voluntary. And the fact that some signatures don't necessarily match what they were 20 years ago is very often cured by the eldest person who's in the room. In our case, it was Vera Brown, who knew just about everybody for years and was able to verify the identities. And for those of you who do not write cursive, whatever squiggle you make on your application vote is the same squiggle that should when you show up at the poll. Thank you.
See, there is value to keeping elections local where the precinct workers actually know the voters. That's right.
I'd also like to thank the panelists for coming and speaking with us today. And on the subject of really giving people comfort of the integrity of our process, I've had the benefit of being that mail-in ballot observer for Westmoreland County since 2020. And I would give credit to the people in the Election Bureau who have treated this as a process for those in manufacturing, brought quality control processes so that for the primary and last year's general, we did have the mail-in ballots completed in time for the 8 o'clock. But Commissioner, it might be interesting for the members for you to talk a little bit about the process of collecting the packets from those 435 precincts and the process that they have set up behind the courthouse on Pennsylvania Avenue that looks like a Formula One or NASCAR pit stop.
Yeah, I mean, the goal is to get it in, we talked about this before, getting it as fast as you can, but within reason. Yeah, it might resemble a NASCAR pit stop sometimes running back there. But it's also very carefully calculated in who is handling, who is checking the boxes, who is signing off. So, Bibi, I think the point you're making is we are trying to do it as quickly as possible while maintaining those quality of controls and chain of custody issues that are absolutely critical to a safe election.
And every county does it differently.
I want to thank everyone for coming here today as an alumnus of St. Vincent who attended, started out attending these for extra credit and started attending them for fun. When I was a freshman here 7 years ago, it's nice to see this continue on. Governor Corbett, I don't know if you remember me, I actually took one of your state and local government classes.
Okay.
Way back when, way back in the old days of 2015, I rode my dinosaur down here. My question is something that you touched on at the beginning, the teamification of politics. And it seems to me that it's worked to the benefit of the parties to, for lack of a better term, teamify. That is to make their supporters, members of their parties, more fans than members of the party. It helps with fundraising, it helps turn out the vote, that sort of thing. So with the benefits to the two established parties, how do we reverse that? If anyone has an idea.
I think, I'm not trying to demonize red team, blue team, but I am trying to say that you should broaden your base as a red team and a blue team. And we haven't done that. And go back to the primary system again. We haven't done that. We have, again, I believe, the extremes have benefited from this and from people looking at, okay, I'm part of the red team or the blue team. I'm simplifying it when we talk about red team, blue team. But it's a matter of getting people to be participatory. I mean, there was nobody in this room that said that they wanted to run for office. I'm going to guess close to 100 people. We need people to run for office. You need to put yourself up. Even if it's only for, remember I told you about school board, even if it's only for school board, run for township commissioner first, okay? Or for county commissioner or county council. But it can't be, I'm waiting for them to take care of it. It's we, okay?
Please don't run for county commissioner yet. I got a lot of work to do still.
I'm a county employee, I'm not.
And yes, I did see a friend of mine who's running for state legislature in the room, Margie. So yes, there's one candidate at least in this room. Things have really changed in the past decade or two. I've been in office for 11 years, but I've been around this game for 25. It's gotten really mean. I don't know how else to say it. It has gotten ridiculously mean. I know I'm old because I remember a time when the goal was to try to woo the other side to your thoughts and your ideals and your principles and your policies. Now it's just about demonizing them, to use your word. I don't know how we change that. I suppose it starts with each and every one of us a little bit in how we participate, in what we post on social media, verifying facts that we want to share. It truly is a shared responsibility. Because if we just keep digging into our corners, folks, and I'll concede, I can be the most partisan Democrat in the room. I am guilty of it. But I try to make it a point to never cross that line of making someone my enemy because they disagree with me. Sure, I think you're wrong, and I'm going to tell you to your face. But I also know you're going home to maybe your wife or your kids or your dog, and you're not a bad person. I just happen to think you're wrong on that, right? And again, as corny as it sounds, each of us has a shared responsibility. Whether you hold office or held office, we all can do better. And I hope this helps tonight.
Yeah, I was going to say one. Well said.
I did not expect that, but thank you.
Yeah, I thought it was beautifully said. One of the aspects of citizenship is the duty that it imposes. It's not just that what we get, it's what we do for our communities. I think, for example, having meetings like this is wonderful. We're all talking to one another. Nobody's angry. Well, maybe you are, but I haven't seen anybody. Nobody's acted out. I actually thought my wife and I have been married 62 years now. Periodically, it's important to renew the vows of marriage. We have no such counterpart in citizenship. It seems to me we should periodically renew the vows of citizenship. Remember what this democracy means, what our obligation to this democracy is, and vow again to be a good citizen, as we do with the marital vows. Anyway, it's a thought. We really need to put this in our head of citizenship is a duty as well as a privilege.
Let me just kind of put a final stamp on that. The state that has the largest legislature, does anybody know which one it is? No, not Pennsylvania. It's New Hampshire.
Yeah.
Extra credit points out here.
And it is a state that still revolves around. And why do you think they keep going to New Hampshire in the beginning of a presidential election? The town hall meeting, what you're doing here today, they do all the time up there. I don't know. I think they're more of a Democrat state than a Republican state, but they go back and forth.
Yeah.
But both parties go up there because it's a participatory event, just like we're having here today.
And to follow up on something that the judge said, so with it being a duty, I had the privilege, I went to law school in Marion Town, Harrisburg, and I got to meet.
I won't hold that against you, since I'm from Duquesne.
Well, I got to meet several international students there, and one of the things that I've learned is that in other places in the world, like Australia, voting is compulsory. You can actually be fined if you're not voting in Australia. Do you think that can kind of positively counteract the polarization if we make voting a chore instead of something that is your choice to do?
You never get the Constitution of the United States changed to require that. That's it.
Well, there's another question. If somebody's so dumb as to not to want to vote, I don't know that I want to compel them to.
And, forced citizenry, I don't know, is ever the best path.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Mr. Nace, thank you for that question. So we're up on time. I want to thank all of our panelists. Thanks very much to the folks here at the college and everywhere else that have sponsored this event, and we hope that you'll come back whenever you're available. Thank you. Good night.
Thank you all.